Hello and welcome to the morning Rabble. As you can see, there's a wee bit of a change of face this week. It's Kerr. How you doing, mate?
No bad, really. My first day back. I've been off a day, so I've decided to join you this morning because you let me in. So thanks a lot for that.
Appreciate that. Right, we're going to discuss the loan market. Obviously, it's something a lot of people have been annoyed about in the past. Maybe some of the players we've brought in, the quality of the players we've brought in. Also, we're going to touch on some of the loans of some of the academy players that have gone out. Is that to benefit the player? Is it to benefit the club? So we're going to touch on the loan market and if Rangers could maybe use it a bit more wisely in some scenarios. Right, I'll go through some of the players that we've loaned in. I'm not going to lie, I actually forgot we'd loaned some of these guys. So if anybody in the comments picks up any I've missed out on, I do apologise. But obviously the obvious ones at the moment are Malik Tillman, James Sands, Aaron Ramsey, Bongani Zungu, Yanis Hadji, Andy King was one that I completely forgot about, I'm not going to lie. Shea Ojo, Florian Camberry, Joe Worrell, Stephen Davis, Jermaine Defoe, Umar Sadiq, Ryan Kent, Lassana Koulibaly and Ovi Ejaria. I mean, that's obviously kind of going back to when Steven Gerrard came in as manager. Yeah. When you look at all of those loan players, is there any of them that really stand out as they were really good loans and obviously they then became permanent deals?
Probably one that stands out the most is Ryan Kent, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, Ryan Kent was signed in loan, done really well. We were desperate to sign him. Stephen Davis came back in loan. Jermaine Defoe came in loan and eventually signed. Obviously, the one that you look at is Aaron Ramsey. Came in with the trumpet blading and everything else. We signed Aaron Ramsey for Juventus and it just kind of died a death, didn't it? He didn't hit the heights. He struggled and we struggled playing him at times, and obviously the other side it was a cost it. But I mean, you look at other guys you mentioned, like Ajaria came in. I actually quite liked Ajaria. Ojo as well looked good at times. And you thought to yourself, these boys have got talent. These boys could do something, especially Koulibaly as well. Remember the tackle he made after the first couple of games? Everybody thought we've signed a warrior here, and they just healed off for whatever reason.
It is, and it's so difficult. I mean, when you look at some of the clubs that some of those players came from, obviously Ovi Ejaria and Shea Ojo came in from Liverpool. So obviously Steven Gerrard's link to Liverpool helped to benefit those loan moves. Joe Worrell was a young player at Nottingham Forest. He's obviously been back there since his loan and he's now a Premier League footballer. Obviously, he had a bit of an up and down spell at Rangers. He did have some really good games, it has to be said, Joe Worrell, but a lot of people obviously remember the mistake he made at Kilmarnock, that was the return for the winter break and they ended up losing 2-1 and he was at fault for one of the goals. Umar Sadiq, I mean, his career's kind of went like to a level that I don't think anybody expected. I mean, I seen Umar Sadiq play a reserve game and he didn't even look very good in the reserve game. No. He just looked a bit cumbersome, a bit kind of not as though he was interested. That was just the kind of body language that he kind of exuded when he was playing. But obviously he's went away and he's done well and he's obviously had a big move since then. Yanis Hadji is one I would like to talk about. Obviously, there was an excitement around Yanis Hadji because of his name as much as anything else. His dad was obviously a phenomenal footballer. What has Yanis done since the loan and becoming permanent? Has he done enough for people to say that the loan then turning into a permanent deal has been the right one for Rangers?
I think he did do enough when he was here on loan. I think you could see how good a footballer he was, how exciting he was to watch. Yeah. He created goals, he scored goals. Obviously, at Yanis' name, he's living with a lot of pressure, isn't he? Because who his dad is, and he's kind of get away a country on the back of him. Because when I was growing up, probably same as yourself, Ali, Romania were a big country. We're getting to tournaments, they were doing really well. But now they struggle. So Yanis is probably the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So he came in, he's done really well. He's still young and learning, and I think technically he's a very good player. And I think he's a type of player that does excite you. The only thing is now he's got a lot of competition to get back in the team, isn't he? But he's also one of these players who have kept their value and we could make money on.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think this is a good point from McCleary, actually. And I think if you ask a lot of fans, will probably say this. Not a fan of loans overall, but if we were to do it, I'd rather take a loan for a year with the buy option at the end. I think that's something that the club are obviously doing a lot more now. You look at like the Malik Tillman deal and the James Sands deal. I think Bonzani Zungu was another one that had the option to buy along with Yanis Hadji. So I think that's something the club. Obviously, Giallo was one I forgot about. I apologise for him. He obviously came in, did really good things at the start, and then I think the game at kind of Parkhead really seemed to hurt him. He kind of slipped out of the team and then come back in towards the end. But he seems to be doing really well.
I thought Diallo should have been signed on an 18-month. I thought the boy was still young. You can see what he had about him, but he needed time. And the 6-month loan spell under Van Bronckhorst kind of threw him in. He done well his first game at Celtic Park. He wasn't the only one who was rotten that night, and you kind of get lambasted for that. Coming to the end of his loan spell, he actually done okay. And I thought maybe another year at Ibrox, he could have stayed and improved, but that was the club's decision. You can see how well he's doing with Sunderland. I know people are saying they're playing in League One or whatever, Championship, but I think it's a Championship then actually. But this might be a level below us, but maybe pressure-wise, but football-wise it probably isn't.
I mean, obviously, Paul makes a good point. I think that was the case, that Yanis was a huge part of the remaining under-21 squad, I think it was, that did really well. And that was one of the reasons why I think he got his big move from Romania to Belgium at the time. And then it didn't really work out for him there. So Rangers were fortunate in that they were able to get the loan with the option of buying. And I think in the end, Rangers actually got the fee down a little bit, if my memory serves me right. I think the fee was supposed to be a little bit higher, but Rangers went away and negotiated the fee, and they managed to bring it down a little bit. I think I would say that overall, Yanis has been a good player for Rangers. Obviously, the injury that's made him miss a year. It'll be interesting to see what kind of player he is once he comes back. Billy Watson obviously talking about Sands has to go back. I think that's fair. I mean, I don't think it's really worked for James here as much as he would have liked. However, that's the nature of the game. You know, you sometimes take a risk on a loan deal. You probably pay a loan fee for the player, but it doesn't always work out for the player or for the club. He might have to go back to America and play for a short period, and then he might make his next move as well after that. But there certainly isn't any ill feeling towards James. It's just not really worked out as well as I'm sure he would have liked to have done. Whereas when you look at Malik and how well he's come into the team, how much he's impacted this starting 11 more than anything else, he's become a key player within the squad as well, which is massive for a young player that comes in, having basically been part of Bayern's kind of fringe team almost. You know, like he wasn't always part of the first team. He'd played a little bit for the second string team, and obviously we managed to get him in loan. I don't know how much. I mean, I didn't really know a huge amount about Malik. I'm not going to sit here and say I did, because I didn't. However, he's really come in and made an impact early on against Union, then the assist over in Eindhoven, and then especially since Michael Beale's come in, I think we've seen even more from him. Maybe because he's allowed more freedom to play. So it's interesting. People will obviously talk about ability, mentality. I'll come to you on a player that I thought should have done a lot more, and I base that on the fact that if you look at his age and his international status, he was playing in a reasonably decent league in France, was Bongani Zungu. Rangers obviously worked hard to get that loan deal done with a view to a permanent deal. And obviously, he came in at the start. He was kind of used sparingly, but then we had the issue during COVID where he got himself into a bit of trouble, and then it just seemed to go for there. Is that sometimes you're just unlucky that things maybe go against you, or does the player need to take responsibility that, you know, while he was here, he should have been more professional, and that could have potentially got him the move to Rangers at the end of that contract?
I think it's probably a mixture of both. I think he probably didn't play enough games as he was expecting, so maybe he's a wee bit frustrated. But you have to, if you're on a loan, you're trying to impress a club, you have to do everything 100%, don't you, to get that move, to get the deal over the line. And he came here to impress. You say we worked hard to get him, and he came here with a lot of people saying how good a player he was and how good a player he's going to be for us and how good he's going to improve us. And he never got any games, to be fair to him. But to me, he was similar to James Sands in a way. He was, like somebody mentioned, he was quite steady. He done everything simple. He was done the basics well, and he never looked a bad player, but he never looked like he was somebody excited giant. And sometimes that's the case when guys come in on loan. You want the fans, especially our fans, we want to see somebody slightly different than what we have already there. And I don't think Zingu done that. I don't think he done anything better than the players we already had.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously, that's quite interesting when you talk about that. I'll talk about some of the academy players that's obviously went out on loan this season. We've got Lewis Mayo at Kilmarnock. He seems to have played kind of most weeks in the Premier League. So for Lewis, that's been great for him. Cole McKinnon obviously started off playing every game at Partick Thistle, and then I think he had a slight injury, so he's kind of dropped out the team a little bit there. Tony Weston started off at Partick Thistle, then returned to Rangers before going back out on loan to Cove. So that's maybe not been Tony's best kind of loans, unfortunately. Ben Williamson's been a pretty reliable player for Dundee. Josh McPake, obviously at Queen's Park, they're obviously doing really well this year in the Championship. Murray Muller and Jay Hogarth are both at Alloa. Kai Kennedy's at Falkirk, along with Juan Alegria, who's now returned from his loan. I don't know what the current situation is with Juan. Kane Richie Hosler still out on loan at Dunfermline, and Harley Ewan's out on loan at the Cumbernauld Colts. Right, Kerr, I'll come to you. See, out of all of those guys out on loan, is there any of those that you think are capable of coming back and having a future at Rangers?
In the day, what it's up to what the manager wants, it's up to the players themselves. All these guys are out on loan to get game time. They try and improve their development, improve them as players. But if they do that when they're out on loan, they get used to playing football every week.
Yeah.
So some might not want to come back and sit and wait for a chance, like we've seen with Charlie McCann. He's away to Forest Green because he wants to play every week. So if we can send players out on loan, they perform really well. Like Lewis Mayo's doing at Kilmarnock, so I think Lewis will end up leaving just because he's been used to playing. He's developed into a decent player, and you probably think, well, is he going to get into our back four at the moment? He's probably not. So if Lewis can go away to Kilmarnock and play somewhere else every week, he'll be happy with that. So I think the players go out and want to get development for themselves, but also if it can get the club some money for them as well. Because not everybody coming through the academy is going to hit the first team.
I'll touch on this one. I know that was out in social media recently that Josh McPake were ending his contract. I think, yet again, that was Football Insider that had put that out. I'm not so sure there's 100% truth in that, if I'm totally honest. Some of the things that has been put out recently by Football Insider, unfortunately, I don't think are 100% accurate. The bit about Cameron Scott, I don't believe was accurate at all. The bit about Robbie Ewer, I'm 100% sure that's not true, because I don't see Rangers offering Robbie Ewer less money than he's already on, given that he scored 22 goals for the B team this year in all competitions. So I think the least that Robbie would have been offered would have been the same money that he's on, if not slightly more, to stay. So I don't believe that's true. And I would have thought if Rangers had a problem with Josh McPake, they would have just terminated his loan and paid him off in January. The fact he's still out on loan at Queen's Park would suggest that I'm not 100% sure that is correct. But obviously a lot of things get said on social media with a lot of different accounts. I'm just not so sure that the Football Insider stuff at times is completely accurate when it comes to a lot of the things that come out of the academy, unfortunately. But I get why people take sort of notice of these accounts and then obviously bring it up. But as far as I'm led to believe, I don't think that is the case with Josh. I'll come to you on a point that has been made a lot of times over the years, and it's maybe something that as a club we could do more of. Is Scotland the best place to loan some of our best young academy players out to? Or do you think, all right, I'll put it in another way to be fair, is there enough clubs interested from like Holland or Belgium or maybe other countries that would make the players think differently to take them on loan? Or do you think that's a problem for Scotland in general?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Rangers have a I don't know if Rangers have a loan officer. I know a lot of clubs have loan officers. They go around other clubs in the UK, clubs abroad to see if anybody's interested in taking players on loan for your team at certain times through the season. So I don't know if Rangers inquire at other clubs about that. But I think players going abroad might change the way they look after themselves, the way they maybe prepare for games and stuff like that. So that'd be a good insight for the lads as well. But I suppose when they go out and loan in Scotland, it might be tough them up. They try and get back into the thing that Rangers try to fight for the first team place. But I think, to be honest with you, some guys just need to get out and loan while to play. So if they can get them to Scotland, they might take it if they don't want to maybe go abroad. But I think someone will like the change, maybe going abroad and play. I know they went, so a few went to America, didn't they?
Yeah.
Orange County in the past. So I think, plus these guys might not get that chance again. So, but I say it's different, and it's different. Football's different in the continent than it is to here, just the way you prepare for games, train and stuff like that. So it'd be good for young guys if you get different insights of football, because they could come back and help them. They could come back and they could tell it to other players in the academy, and it could help them that way as well.
Yeah. I'll come to obviously Billy's comment. He's always talking about the reserve league. I mean, obviously at the moment there is a reserve league. It's just that some of the clubs within the top flight aren't actually part of it, because obviously Rangers, Celtic, and Hearts are in the Lowland League. They then chose not to play in the reserve league, and I think there's only like 9 or 10 games due to be played over the whole season, and then there's a reserve cup competition as well, which I think is currently ongoing. I'm not so sure there's a huge future for the reserve league, and I think it comes down, unfortunately, to a lot of clubs not wanting to keep a lot of players on the books, because if they've got players that are between the 18s and the first team, that money can be utilised to maybe bring in a first team player. And a lot of clubs are now kind of cutting away that sort of segment of the squad. And it's not nice to hear, but it seems to be happening a lot more now. So I'm not too sure how much of a future we will have with a reserve league in the future. I think Rangers would rather look at another option if they could. Obviously, they've done the best versus best against some teams in Europe over the years. They've played in the Lowland League. We have played in the reserve league, but I don't think it was used the way that it should have been, because not enough players in the first team were dropping in to play in it. So it was basically just a league of boys that had been playing against each other for years. So they weren't getting the benefit of being tested. And I think that's where it all went a wee bit wrong, to be honest. James is obviously talking about the Orange County. I think it's a tough one. I think Rangers seen the link as good for a lot more reasons than just football orientated. Obviously, having a link to a club that were pushing at the time to become part of the MLS, they maybe seen a future in that link. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the loans didn't really work out. I think quite a few of the boys got homesick and they ended up coming back a bit sooner than anticipated. We then had the issue with COVID, which obviously kind of cropped up at one point where the players obviously returned quickly. And then there was some of the other loans the boys just didn't really play. If I'm totally honest, is that a problem for Rangers that we were sending guys over in loan who couldn't even get in the Orange County starting 11? So I think there's a multitude of things you could look at on that front. Has it been a great link overall? Well, we obviously brought the young goalkeeper Aaron Cervantes in. He has since left the club. And we've obviously just recently brought in Francis Jacobs, who was somebody that people will be aware of from a few years ago. He had to wait until he was 18 to actually sign. So I think that is due to go through this month at some point. So we'll probably find out about that. Paul is bringing up, what's your thoughts on some of the lads signing their pro deals? Yeah, look, I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting for a lot of the young players who are potentially going to be joining the club on a professional basis. There's a lot of talent within that group. I watched them last week against Celtic, and I thought we played some really good stuff at times. We obviously stole the game late on, thanks to Josh Gentles scoring a late winner. But yeah, I think it's always good that you can sign a lot of guys from one age group. I think in some previous years we've not had as many players, and that's not been great for the club. So it's good to see that we do have a decent batch of young players that will hopefully make that step up to the 18s next season. Okay, we'll move on to some of the players in the first team who are out on loan at the moment, and guys who have been out on loan previously, and whether those loans will help the club sell the players or if the players have moved on, kind of thing. Matthias Sikowski, obviously you'll probably remember him, the young Polish player that we signed for a couple £100,000 out on loan at Lech Poznan. Cedric Kitten was obviously sent out on loan to Guther Forth, has since left the club on a full-time basis. Nikola Katic went on loan to Hajduk Split, did reasonably well, was obviously deemed still surplus after that. He has since moved on a permanent basis. Glenn Middleton, he was obviously on loan at St Johnstone. He's now moved on to Dundee United. Stephen Kelly had several loans, obviously, as people will be aware, including Salford, and he has now signed permanently for Livingston. So I'll come to you, Kerr. in that sense, has the loan market been worthwhile because the players have eventually been moved on, whether it's been for a small fee or just to sort of clear their wages, in all honesty?
Probably is. It makes sense because obviously the club don't want them to sit in every weekend, no playing any games or just training. So moving them out and loan that gets them games, and like you said, they can make some fee. But the players want to play themselves. So if they go out like a couple of boys have left because they've been contracts been terminated and went. So sometimes you've got too big a squad and you have to trim it down. So if loans work, that's fine. If it don't, then some managers come in like don't fancy some of the players that's there. And if a contract's coming down, then you just maybe move them on. But I mean, Stephen Kelly's been out on loan a good few times. I know you really like Stephen,
Yeah.
and he had a decent loan spell at Salford by all accounts, and he's come back up the road and he's playing really well at Livingston. And I think Stephen's one of these players who, if he keeps performing the way he is, he could end up getting another move to maybe a bigger club or end up down in England, or like a couple of folk are saying Italian teams maybe watch them and take them over there, like they've done with some of the young Scottish boys previous. So I think Stephen just needed a chance at Rangers. He never ever got it, but we can say that about other players, haven't we, at the club at the moment, like Devine, like King, like Lowry. So I think maybe they three as well, Willie, maybe have to go out and loan to get some game time under their belt.
Look, I think what's interesting with somebody like Stephen, I always felt like he was good enough to be part of the Rangers squad. I always felt like he was able to play for the first team. Obviously, maybe just due to what we were trying to do at the time, i.e. try and win a league title, maybe the manager felt it wasn't the best thing to do. But I look at Stephen at Livingston now, and he seems to have kind of found the right team with Martindale in charge, because he is an attack-minded manager. I don't think maybe people give Livingston the credit they deserve for the type of football they play. And you look at some of the guys that they've signed, some of the players that are in this current squad as well. There's a lot of talented guys in that squad, and I think the fact that Martindale was able to persuade Stephen Kelly to move there, and Stephen's obviously done really well this season. I think that's kind of 5 or 6 goals he's now got this season from midfield, which was always something that I wanted to see more of, to be honest, because Stephen was actually a pretty good finisher when he got into position. He just didn't do it enough. So maybe this is something that Martindale has added to his game, or he's just said to him, look, you've got the ability to do this. So get yourself into the box, get yourself into those positions where you can actually hurt the players, to hurt the opposition team and to get in behind those players. And for me, I think Stephen's very, very good. And I don't think it's long before he'll be, making that next step away to potentially maybe a club in England or another club in Scotland. And I would love to, further down the line, see him, back at Rangers. But I don't know if that's obviously going to happen. But I would love to see that happen. Stephen Keane's talking about see Hibs played Borussia Dortmund in the UEFA Youth League. Yeah, I only seen the score, to be honest with you, mate, because I was at the B team game. Look, I don't have any issue with like Hibs players doing well and showing up in Europe, because you know what? It's good for Scottish football and it's good for the academies to show that these players are doing well. Rangers have obviously been in the UEFA Youth League and they've done really well and they've competed against good teams. But then sometimes you hit a level where you just can't get over that. In recent years, we've played some top Spanish teams that have just been too strong for us, to be honest. The quality has been above what we have in this country. And that's why I think that the current structure probably isn't helping us to move up that next level. And that's why, there's obviously talk about the European Super League. I think that's something the guys are going to touch on in some of the pods as well. I would like to see that happen at youth level, where there's maybe a competition that Rangers or Celtic or Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, whoever wants to be involved in it, can join. And then you're playing against some of the best academies throughout Europe. Because I feel like that's the only way that's going to help us develop players. When you're playing against the best young players in Europe, that's going to help our young players improve massively. And to me, that would be the next logical step for the club if it was feasible and if the money was there. And I think that's something that I would like to see. What's your opinion on it, Kerr? Always, would you like to see like a British youth league where maybe we're up against maybe like all the under 21 teams in England, or do you think like a European league would be more beneficial?
mean, either or. I think both of them would really help us because I think the Lowland League's good to a point, but I think sometimes we have to play against better opposition. I know we'll probably not win as many games, but you learn more when you're playing teams like, as Lisa said there, Brentford, do things that are similar. So if you play against even teams like that, you're playing against guys who might be more physical, but your own age. And I mean, I remember going to youth, was it youth game with you? It was against, I can't remember what foreign team it was. We went to Dumbarton. But that was a really good match in the
I think that was the Swedish team, wasn't it, that we played against earlier in the competition?
Yeah. I mean, the guys are up for the games. I mean, they're playing, no disrespect to the lower league teams, but they're playing them. It's like the SPL. They play them maybe 2 or 3 times, 4 times a season. So your motivation's not there as much. But when you're playing against teams like for abroad and teams for England, you're up for it more because you look at money Man City spend their academy, Man United spend their academy, Chelsea, etc. And they're buying the best players, not just in the UK, but on the continent as well. And if we can play against teams like, I mean, you've been down to Man City's academy watching Rangers, and you've seen the setup they've got, and you've seen what their players are like, and you see much of the academy players when they get sold are worth. Do you know what I mean? There's players like James McAtee, who's a value at £20 million, and he's not played for Man City yet, really, has he? So I think it'd be good for us if we played against higher opposition, to be fair, Willie, because the guys will learn a lot more.
Yep. Yeah, obviously Brentford obviously do it slightly differently. They kind of do it on their own. They kind of go out and I think this week they're in something called the Atlantic Cup, which is involving teams from all over Europe. And I noticed recently they played Monaco as well. I mean, they have an interesting way of doing it. But I did notice recently, I think it was an article that I seen online, that they're apparently rebuilding their academy again after basically shutting it down. But I don't know if that's part of the new system, that if you have a top flight team in England, that you need to have an academy. And I think maybe that's where they're maybe being forced into it. Whereas previously they basically shut down the academy and then they were just signing players to play in this, Brentford B team as it was. And then they've obviously been out and played all this team. I mean, like they've played teams for even out with Europe. I think they've played like South American teams and Asian teams and all that. I think they've went, the full way, but it's obviously slightly easier for them in that the Premier League brings in huge sums of money. Whereas, Rangers don't have that sort of option. That's why I think a European Super League would be an interesting concept for the young players, because clearly there would be sponsorship involved in that. There would probably be enough that the clubs would be able to cover all their costs, whether that's flights or train journeys, hotel stays, whatever was required. And I think that would just be a huge benefit to so many clubs throughout the world. I don't know if people obviously look at maybe some of the other countries and how a lot of young players develop. To me, one that really stands out is Denmark. It feels like every year a club in Denmark are selling a player for 10, 15, 20 million pounds. Like sort of Michelin have done it. Nordsjælland, Bromby. I mean, there's a few other clubs in there. They bring in a lot of African players and they bring them in and they develop them and improve them. And it's impressive what they do. So nobody can tell me that playing against these teams wouldn't be a benefit to Rangers.
Of course it would. And even just going to some of these places and seeing how they do things as well would be a benefit for us.
Yeah. I think it's just frustrating because it feels like we could do more to help our young players. And I think that's where the loan system that I've wrote down all the names and we spoke about all the different players. The loan system's good to a point. However, there is still a huge gap to be bridged between playing under 18 football and then playing first team football. And until that is done properly, I think it's still going to be extremely difficult for a lot of young players to move up, unless you're truly exceptional and you go straight from the 18s into the first team, which has obviously happened. However, it's a very, very, very small percentage of people that do that. And
do you think this all leads back to just basically grassroots in general in Scotland, but coming for the very bottom right through teams academies? As in the way football's kind of channeled in Scotland, because even at youth games, I mean, I've been a coach myself, and it's like the emphasis is always on winning more than it's on development. And I know maybe at a football club it's slightly different. Obviously, you see a lot of academy stuff, but I just feel the grassroots right through and hitting club teams, it's more emphasis be placed on development than like winning mentality. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of that comes down to maybe because a lot of the coaches are parents, dads, and stuff like that. I think more money should be made into grassroots in Scotland, football wise, and then maybe it would help the clubs as well.
Yeah, I think what's really tough at the moment is that even the best young players are now being sought after by the top English clubs, because obviously Brexit has impacted a lot of the top English clubs.
Yeah.
In the past, they were out signing the best 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, but they can't do that now. So they're now looking at the Scottish market in particular, because they can still bring in young Scottish players at 16. And that's why we've obviously lost guys like sort of Billy Gilmore, we've lost like Deary Mabudi, we've lost Rory Wilson. And there was obviously talk recently that we were going to lose, Cameron Scott was obviously one that was online. There was, I think Jack Wiley was another one that was possibly being touted around some of the clubs. And this is the problem we now have, because the English teams can't just tap into the European market. The Scottish market's now been like sort of pummeled to a point, and they're taking all the best young players, or they're trying to take all the best young players. And I don't know if somebody's seen the deal yesterday. Was it Jay Morgan? I think it might have been the guy's name. Yeah, he's like 16, 17, and they're saying that the fee could rise to as much as £10 million. I mean, that's more money than we've ever spent in a first team player for about 20 years. And they're signing they're signing 16, 17-year-olds to basically come and play in maybe like the under-21 league. And it's, I mean, I don't even know how you actually stop that. How do Rangers stop young players from moving?
I don't think they can, Wally, because the agents, as you say, maybe like Gilmore, they turn up and promise them the world, and obviously money's involved, and houses and cars, whatever else they offer. It's tough for the boys to turn it down. It's tough for their families to say no, and also the agents are pressuring them constantly. And when you're that age, that's life change. Your money, you might not have a first team game for anybody significant, but the money you've earned just with that move, it's kind of set you up for a while, hasn't it? Or probably for life.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, there's kind of one of the points they're talking about. The fact we were able to bring in Zach Lovelace. We obviously brought in Archie Stevens as well. So it obviously works.
We've done Joe Aribo, didn't we?
Of course.
Thing. So we worked with
I think some of these guys get frustrated, don't they? Because they don't see that pathway. Because maybe there's just so many players in front of them at times that they find it's really difficult. William's asking, is Francis Jacobs injured? Basically, he's been in Scotland now for a few months training, but he's not actually able to play a game until he turns 18, which I think is at some point this month. He might have already even turned 18. I'm not too sure, but I know it's at some point in February. So Francis will be able to play for Rangers once that obviously happens, and hopefully you see him at some point over the next few months. But Francis is in Scotland. He's been training with the squad, so he will be available in the not too distant future. He's not injured as far as I'm led to believe, so he should be available to play once he has hit 18. Just want to thank everybody yet again. It's been a bit of a crazy morning. I think the big point we're just trying to get across is that the loan market can be good, but it can also not work. And I think when you look at all the players we named earlier on, there's probably only 3 or 4 out of maybe 20 players that have really made a difference at Rangers. And I think that's why a lot of people are against the loan system, because it's not always helped or benefited the first team. And also looking at the loan market for young players, could we do more? Could we look at sending players to another country, because maybe they'll be pushed a little bit further there in a different environment? Would a European kind of B-team Super League be something that's feasible to happen over the coming years? Is a British kind of youth league something that could happen, where maybe the boys are still playing some games in Scotland, but there's also a league that they could play 15 or 20 games against the best English clubs as well? Would that help them develop more? It's something we can touch on again, maybe in a couple of weeks' time. But thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate all the comments that you have put in. Thanks for joining us yet again at this time in the morning. I hope you have a great weekend, guys, and we'll speak to you all again very, very soon. Cheers.